became certain that there must be an error, and the error must be either outside or it could be mine. I couldn't see the fact that the world had changed. And I went through a period of soul searching because I thought perhaps I was too old-fashioned. I had too many rigid ideas that the world was changing. Remember, those were the days of Mr. Greenspan, who advocated a complete revolution in productivity and other such factors. And I asked myself, perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps what I believe is wrong, and perhaps everyone else is right. And now it seems insignificant, but back then it was an enormous burden on me, because if I were wrong, that means my actions or inactions would have an effect on other people's savings. So I had to do something about it. What you do in these cases is it's sort of like when you get lost on the road and you don't know where you are. You may have a map. The map doesn't help you unless you know where you are. Right? So you have to retrace your steps in some way and go back to the very basics and try to rethink the basic assumptions of what is real and what is not. Most of us, when we're younger, we want to believe the authorities, we want to believe the rating agencies, we want to trust government statistics or authorities of all sorts. And it happens as you grow older, particularly in a setting like this, where you become convinced that they all lie, and everything is phony and everything is false. And I mean everything.
Yeah.
Everything. So you go back and retrace your steps, and I did that with some friends, and I rediscovered the fact that I was right. The whole economic system, financial system, rather, not economic as we knew it, was fault. That gave me a great deal of courage to acquire the kinds of things at the time that no one wanted, and sell off, realize a lot of gains that were gained in the previous 15 years.
Yeah.
And what people didn't want at the time was oil. It was copper, coal, gold, silver, and German government bonds.
Right. Yes.
So by the time the system came to a crashing halt in 2001, 2, 3, whatever it was, it became obvious that my sentiment about the relative value of these financial assets was correct. But then started a new era where we reinflated the system somehow.
Yeah.
And so all I'm saying to you is that we have gone, in my own brief lifetime so far, 30 years of practice, we have gone from booms to busts to booms to busts. Now, if you are merely in front of a Bloomberg machine and you think that you can anticipate these matters and you can anticipate interest rates and foreign exchange rates, you're deluding yourself, because no one really knows when the next boom or bust will take place or when. But the problem comes in not trying to impress your customer, but trying to protect what he has spent years accumulating. How do you do that? That has always been difficult throughout the ages, but it has become phenomenally more difficult, nearly impossible, if you practice within the framework that you have been used to all these years. Think about it.
No, I agree. And when you went through this soul searching period back in the late 90s, and you went away and you sat down for a weekend and you really went through every assumption that you made and stress tested it. First of all, to come out of that sure that you're right and everybody else is wrong.
No.
But it's that takes a lot of character, a lot of self-confidence, and a lot of real belief. You came out knowing that, and you acted accordingly. You essentially sold everything in your portfolios. I mean, that's taking action after a lot of soul searching, and few people would have the courage to do that. Your your investors, your customers, obviously they put their trust in you, and here you are coming back to them saying, okay, everything I've been doing has to change.
Yeah.
How do they react to that? And is that reaction, you've built up a very strong bond relationship with these people by doing the right thing over so many years. Do you find that making such a drastic change causes someone to say, Tony's lost the plot? Or do people, having seen your track record, seen your performance, say, well, this is serious?
Well, first of all, it is their capital and they have a right to find someone else to help them with. I have no monopoly on ideas. I think one or two perhaps did. But I think I have always been eager to communicate the framework, the foundation, the principles of the framework that motivates action. In 1999, I worked very hard to produce, make a speech to our clients at the time, and I wanted to show that the seeming prosperity that existed, because if you go back and look at, everything seemed to be so extraordinary at the time. It was an illusion. And this is very difficult to see because so I wrote my speech and I borrowed from James Grant's, the title of his book, The Trouble with Prosperity, which he makes the same point. You have this apparent prosperity, but unless you examine its causes, you don't know to what extent it is real or it's an illusion. If you gave me your American Express card, I can go out on a buying spree and I can acquire all kinds of goods. And everyone can see how wealthy I am because I'm wearing wonderful clothes, I'm driving a great car. In fact, I'm adding to the GDP.
Right.
But no one quite knows that the money has been borrowed from your credit card.
Right.
And to the extent I don't have to pay it back, then it's real.
Words like integrity are thrown around like confetti these days, but I was captivated by Tony's framework and the clarity and the simplicity of his thinking. Tony is a deep-thinking, principled man trying to assemble a collection of assets which can not only endure, but also withstand the pressures exerted upon them by time and turbulence. And it struck me that perhaps this second definition of integrity, the notion of a soundly constructed, durable and unimpaired portfolio, has been lost in a world where monthly performance has become the holy grail, and investors' time horizons have been compressed, in many cases to the point of becoming a hindrance to effective money management. Tony's ideas around endurance and permanence of both capital and the assets selected to represent it fascinated me, and I wanted to dig deeper into how his framework evolved and how he thought about building such a collection of assets. You have this way of investing in...
Dancing pandas don't sell CRM. Ads on LinkedIn do. LinkedIn is the place to be.
Permanence and endurance and things that have been there and will be there for a long time. So just, if you can, describe how you think about that and how you go about identifying companies and people that you would invest in.
In the beginning of the QE period, the global QE period, I became convinced that the system was going to destroy the nature of money in itself. Became convinced that the rules of the game had changed completely. When the rules change, the basic framework with which you make a decision needs to change. You cannot, and no one really, remember back those days, post 2008, 2009, 10, 11. Back in those days, virtually every financial agent, not economic, wished that things would go back to normal. They thought that pre-2008 was normal, which is not to reveal the truth. But when the rules of the game change, the process with which you make decisions, the process with which you act, the value of information, the value of inputs must change with it. And I think that two things change. Not only the rules of the game change, but the expectations of people were not commensurate to the reality that existed. So as perhaps others did, that the time had come for me to hang my wings, so to speak, and leave the game. I would not want to participate in an environment in which I had to do things because they were expected, rather than I thought was the right thing to do. But the second most important thing that happened to me is that as a result of that, I began thinking about if the rules of the game have changed enough, you cannot trust anything. If you don't trust financial accounts, if you don't trust ratings reports, if you don't trust the government, if you don't trust the press, if everyone lies to you, literally, it's sort of like going to a restaurant where everything on the menu is poisoned, but you're hungry.
Right.
Right? You have to do something. And the thing, what you can do is exit the system. Just exit completely. But the second thing that mattered to me, if I am involved in a situation where honestly I don't know what is real from what is not, I have to start re-examining what is real, what is really real versus what is not. People talk about outstanding companies. The word is used often by value investors. The question is, what is an outstanding company? People talk about good management. What is a good management? No one can really define that. People judge others and make value decisions with respect to so-called equities on the basis of the success of the stock price. Well, I began thinking about what is it that is important. And one of the things that I felt really, even though I lived in Europe at the time and I had left in America, there's something extraordinary that takes place, and that is we in America, and I say we, are quite keen to like what is faster and what is bigger and what is better. So often growth for the sake of growth overwhelms our motivation and our actions. We think of growth stocks, we think of growth industries. We even use the word to grow earnings, which is to grow the company, etc. But what if these measurements were wrong? What if really what mattered is something other than bigger and better? The second monumental observation I made was that what really mattered was not that, but the idea of endurance, the idea of durability. I began looking at investments we owned that had a history of 100, 150, 200 years. And you ask yourself, how could they have survived that long? What were the ingredients that have contributed to their such permanence? Permanence is an illusion. It's not really a fixed word. There's no such thing as permanence in our world, but it's something we perhaps strive to. And I think endurance is a better word to describe what I'm saying. And all my life up until that point, I've been examining the idea of failure. Failure had been the failure on the part of others had been the principal textbook from which I learned what not to do, or how not to think, or what to examine or not. I began thinking of those who have survived the test of time. Again, as a way of a textbook, thinking of those ingredients that have allowed them to adapt to changes, survive wars, inflations, etc., the people issues, etc., generations, etc., and try to recognize those ingredients that allows a few to survive and endure. Because if I'm going to protect prior earnings or savings that have been earned in prior years for the future, whether it's for future consumption or a future generation, I have to deploy them in a manner that is consistent with such enduring characteristics. And so I began, that was a monumental revelation to me, that some people have survived and have adapted and have grown, and I have. But many of these companies are, of course, privately held. and they would never wish to be listed on the stock exchange.
Mm-hmm.
But others are listed, but only nominally, in the sense that they once had an offering some 50, 60, 100 years ago, and they still have a few shares owned by non-family members. And I discovered that I owned a few of these things for reasons that they were not purposeful.
Yeah.
So I began focusing on what endures and what is real, independent of the financial world, completely independent.
Did you ever stress about us having 3 kids?
No. I was always part of the plan.
And so what did you find? Because we do live in a financialized world, and finance for finance's sake and investing has become all about making money, not necessarily capital preservation, not necessarily income. It's become, okay, which stock is going to go up the most in the next 6 months to a year, or whatever my time frame is. What did you find when you had this monumental moment and you started looking into these companies? What was it that you found?
The first principle I operate from is the idea of exclusion. I
Right.
exclude whole swaths of things from my universe of things that I think that in the whole world there are probably 150, 200 listed companies that I would even consider owning a piece of. So it's a completely different way of looking at the world. Well, they were all in my universe already.
Yeah.
I think that when you start examining what it is you own, what happens if you're on a ship and it's going down, and you're in your cabin and you have 5 minutes to get out, to get up to the deck, you look at your possessions that are sitting in your cabin and you say, what's worth taking with me?
Right.
Not many things, is it? And this is what I did in essence. Now the thing is that if you do this with respect to your own savings, it's one thing. But if you do this in an institutional setting where other people involved, that's a little bit more difficult, because you not only must you deal with the idea of what is right with respect to the capital you are been entrusted, but you have to be concerned also with the expectations of other people, or the expectations of others. And this is quite significant, because I think that one of the things that is missing, and one of the things that I have discovered, is that there is a substantial distinction between people who are investors and people who are owners in businesses. An owner in a business is far more interested in its survival in the first instance than its necessary monetary value. No owner of a business wakes up every morning asking himself what he's worth.
Right.
He doesn't know what he's worth. He's concerned with his products, he's concerned with his employees, he's concerned with his suppliers, he's concerned with his customers. To do that, you have to have a time preference that is different from other people. If you only own things that are quoted, you look at the quotation machine as to give you confidence in the fact that, hey, I made a great decision yesterday, this thing went up.
Right.
Okay. You have a falsity in your understanding. You're an investor, you rent something for hoping that it will go up. You are making decisions based on expectations of what you think other people's expectations are likely to be, based on their framework. And an investor is really one who generally will acquire something hoping he will sell it at a higher price.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of the calculations and all of the pseudo-intellectual activity that goes along with it is based on this idea of price. Is this price high or low, relevant to what other people are going to think of it next year? What is it likely to be next year, and why, etc. Owners don't do this. They're interested in building substance. They're interested in building the productive base of the company, recapitalizing earnings or whatever. So the focus on wealth creation is different from that of an investor as an owner. But to be an owner, it's difficult for an investor to be an owner, because you cannot have immediate liquidity. If you and I own a big farm with grow carrots, we can sell part of it tomorrow because we want to finance a trip
Right.
around the world.
Right.
And also there is another element that is of significance here, and that is that there's a very large gap in perception and temperament between an American and perhaps an English-speaking view of the world from, say, a continental European temperamented view of the world. I'm not familiar with the Asian world at all. I've stayed out of it. I can't do everything. The idea of leveraging a balance sheet to buy back your shares so your earnings per share can go up is completely foreign where we are, for example. It just doesn't. It doesn't happen. Yet it is a financial tool in America. The idea of having having a fragile balance sheet for the sake of a higher gold price doesn't lend itself to the idea of ownership. An owner is really very concerned with his balance sheet.
Yeah.
In fact, the balance sheet is perhaps more important than his income statement. His ability to endure and survive is based on the strength of his balance sheet. And the nature of the assets on the balance sheet is not just assets, but the nature of the asset. And so, on account of the convenience of the English language, we speak in general terms about financial matters and equities, etc. But the framework with which different people in different countries make different decisions in general, on a generalized basis, is very, very different. For us, it's even more difficult because we have shareholders from some 30 countries around the world. All have perhaps different cultural, different business expectations and framework. But the important thing is that they all are largely like-minded to what we aim to achieve. As I said to someone recently, it's akin to the idea of if you are a captain of a ship, it's nice to know that all of the passengers on board your ship are going to the same destination. Well, that's where they wish to go.
Right.
And that's where you started out going. And so they will judge you eventually by having gotten there, rather than perhaps how long it took because you avoided certain weather or other such things. By the same token, this like-mindedness, I have come to conclude that it is a necessary ingredient even in the deployment of capital. And that is, if I am interested in acquiring 5-10% of your enterprise as a participation, I want to be absolutely certain that the motivation that you have as an owner and manager is similar to that of mine. I have an interest in you making the kind of decisions that will have an impact on the company 20, 30 years from now, rather than next quarter or next year. So if your objectives and if your motivation is different than of mine and the capital that I deploy, then at some point I'm going to be disappointed. So like-mindedness, whether it is in a marriage, in a business, or in any enterprise, is a principal and important factor in doing the right thing in the right way.
Make your comeback with a community of support at Purdue Global and be more prepared than ever with caring, invested professors who share real-world experience and stand behind you every step of the way. Purdue Global, Purdue's online university for working adults. Apply now.
Leonardo da Vinci once said that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And as I listened to Tony talk about the carefully laid foundations of his investment framework, and what he looks for in terms of both assets in which he may want to take an ownership stake and the families that he, as the captain, allows to board his metaphorical ship, I realised that at the end of the day, the simplicity of how Tony invests affords him the luxury of being able to do so in a way that few professional managers today can.
I do what you would do with your own
Yes.
capital as an owner of that capital.
Yes.
The only thing I have is that I have purposefully extracted myself and our team and our organization from the financial world. That's all I've done. So when you extract yourself from it, your vocabulary changes, your practice changes, your philosophy changes, everything changes.
Yeah.
You know the fellow Nicholas Taleb,
Yep.
who wrote this famous. He's written this, in my opinion, one of the most extraordinary books I've ever read, called Anti-Fragile.
Yes.
In it, I mean, to many people it will be a rambling thing, but it is the most extraordinary analysis of those factors that lead to this kind of issues that we talked about, the ability to survive, this ability to robustness, or the ability to actually gain strength from a difficult environment in which you are, this anti-fragility sort of. Anyway, these ideas have always existed in life, have always existed in the course of events, have always existed in industry, in people who do things. Where they don't exist is the financial. So in order to understand them and appreciate them and embed them in your own thinking, you have to exit the financial world.
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah. That ability to own something, really own it for the long term, has been taken away by monthly liquidity and by how many basis points did you miss the benchmark by, well, I'm going to redeem. That has really made most people doing what you do as stewards of other people's savings, it's taken away the ability you have to own things. Because
It's true.
you can't own something for a month.
This is really true.
It's called renting.
But as earlier I talked to you about the idea of like-mindedness, for example, and so I'm serious about this in the sense that I want to own a participation. I don't call it a stock or equity. I own a business participation in a business that is run by owners whose motivation is the same as mine, who are responsible to their family and to their community and to the capital that they employ as much as I would have been if I owned the same enterprise. So instead of owning 100%, I own 2, 3, 4, 5, 10%.
Sure.
But
But the missing 78, 89, 90% is owned by
one or two families.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who've owned it for 50, 100, 150,
Right.
200 years. I can sleep very well at night, which I think is more important than eating well.
Right. Yes.
You can go without food, but you can't go without sleep. It also adds to the idea of what I said I consider important is the enduring value of something. So when you think of values simply in financial terms, a price to earnings ratio, a price to book ratio, all of these are accounting terms. They also reflect what happened in the past.
So, but traditional EBITDA and price earnings ratios and all the things that people fixate on, and guidance. You know, you and I have spoken previously about guidance and what happens when a company misses a guess they made about what might happen at some point in the future.
Right.
How do you look on that sort of stuff?
Well, EBITDA is not traditional.
No,
it didn't
it
exist when I was a young man.
Sure.
The only reason EBITDA is around is on account of the ability to finance acquisitions through credit.
Yep.
Were it not for credit creation, there wouldn't be EBITDA. Okay. Second, real owners do not think of the value of business as a multiple of the cash they generate before everything. It's just earnings before everything. It's a BBA.
Right.
Second, the idea of earnings, if you really quite think about it, is very important. Earnings are very important. A company must be profitable, and equally as much, it has to generate cash. So profitability cannot be related only to accounting entries.
Yep.
But even though this is the case, the idea of profitability on any one period to another is really a function of the oftentimes temporal events. And so a price to earnings ratio is actually quite meaningful, somewhat, but it's not really so essential in terms of value. So we don't really pay much of any attention to that. I do want to see a recapitalization of earnings, so I think to us perhaps earnings before interest and tax is a larger, is perhaps more important in the sense that it incorporates balance sheet components, but also the compounding of that earnings to the book value per share is a far more important indicator of a company's ability to compound it, because that's really what wealth is. Wealth is the compounding of earnings. And you acquire machinery and equipment to allow you greater freedom in adding to that pile. So you take from existing earnings and add to that. This is really the nature of capitalism, the ability to satisfy the needs of a customer and create an enduring enterprise that adds value to you. This is self-interest is the foundation of all.
Yes, right.
So, also today, largely in the United States, but this is increasingly more common here in this continent. The emphasis is placed on the income statement, often to the complete exclusion of the balance sheet.
Yeah.
And I said to you earlier, I think the balance sheet is probably more primary engaging this idea of endurance, but not on its own alone. The components that are there must be examined, the nature of the assets, and their economic value in the process. So I think that most owners of businesses do exactly the same thing we're doing. I don't think there's any difference.
No, but that's you. To your earlier point, you're aligned with the businesses in your motivation. That's
now you asked me about this nonsense about earnings estimates and forecasts and what they call them, the
forward guidance.
Forward guidance.
Yeah.
Bollocks. I mean, I think that every CEO that I know personally would tell you in person that they have no clue.
Yeah.
And first of all, even if they did have a clue, why would they give you forward guidance?
Yeah. There's nothing in it for them, you're right.
No, there is something for them. If there are options involved.
Well, exactly right. We're talking business owners here, not CEOs.
I mean, what is the purpose for having forward guidance? The only purpose is the price of the stock.
Yeah.
And then, therefore, the price of the stock becomes the product. So then it becomes a game. So the focus is not on making something, the focus is on how do we make money.
Yeah.
So the idea behind the business is money is made as a result of doing something well. I mean, that's the principal foundational aspect of this. You do well financially as an individual because you contribute something worth someone else is willing to pay what you contribute. So to the extent that the only objective is to make money, or to acquire something for the purpose of reselling it or what have you, you lose track of those essential components of this idea of independence and endurance that I spoke to you about. So it becomes a game.
Yeah.
I have a very different view of other people have towards the idea of diversification. You screen because you have certain, now computers. I mean, when I was a young man, we didn't have computers and you couldn't do any of this stuff. You had value line in America and other such things in Europe. In fact, I invested in companies in Europe who did not even want to give you their balance sheet and accounts.
Right.
We own 28 participations. Some of them, they all have a purpose. Some of them are more core and more permanent than others. Others are opportunistic or temporal or whatever. The idea of going out to try to find more, why would I want to do that? First of all, I once wrote a paper and I called it my great broom theory. And what I did is I went on the Bloomberg machine and I said, give me all the companies in the world that are listed, the principal listing. And the computer says 78,522, for argument's sake. I said, okay. Now I said, I really don't know about anything about Africa, the Middle East, and say South America, and some places in. So I just want you to reduce it to companies that are in North America, Western Europe, and perhaps Australia, New Zealand, and computer says, okay, now you got 48,226. Okay, that's good. And then you say, okay, now give me companies that are financially solvent. That means they have a current ratio, at least on a current ratio basis, of at least 1. It says 22,500 something. Okay, great. Now I said to myself, I will invest in nearly anything except for businesses that are finance related.
Yep.
Banks, insurance companies, mortgage companies. I'm not interested.
Yeah.
Take out all those companies. Okay, now you've got 10,500 something. All right, now I said to myself, I really want to own something in a firm that is manageable or it's owned by, so take anything away over 10 billion of market cap.
Okay.
And anything under, say, 100 million in market cap. Just give me some 8,500. Okay, now I said, give me companies who are, this is true, you can do that today, or some variation thereof, that pay a dividend of more than 1 penny per share. At least 1 penny. I want some dividend back. Another thing. Give me companies that have, a debt to equity ratio of no more than X. Another thing. Ends up that you end up with maybe 250, 300 out of all those. And that's in all industries.
Yeah, sure.
Now, the possibility of finding anything worthwhile in there is really remote. I mean, at any one point in time, right?
Yeah.
But what you do is you learn about business, not about stocks, but about business. You learn the food business, the fertilizer business, engineering. You learn about specific endeavors, and you acquire an understanding. A businessman who grows, say, carrots. I'm using this example.
Yeah.
He's completely uninterested in spending time learning about semiconductors.
Sure.
Yeah. Because no matter how much he knows, he will never know what can go wrong.
Yeah.
He knows carrots. He knows what can go wrong in the carrot business. He knows the components that contribute to a successful carrot business. So you can never tell me that there's a young man, 25 years old, however many degrees he may have from Harvard, who can sit in New York and know what can go wrong in some biotech business in Japan or some machinery business in Spain. He sees things superficially on financial information, on superficial look at what it looks like or what it has looked like.
Sure.
When you buy for the purpose of selling, you don't really need to understand what can go wrong.
No, that's
you
very
see
true.
everything in terms of price.
That's very true.
So we have a relatively important stake in the business of salmon farming, for argument's sake. Well, not just myself perhaps, but we have a team that knows more or less everything there is to know about salmon farming, literally everywhere in the world. We know what can go wrong. We know where the strengths are. We know where where the ability is, where the skill is. We know, and not just merely from what will happen in the price of, say, salmon today or tomorrow, the demand or supply of it, but in terms of those ingredients that contribute to the long-term viability of a business. But we also pay to understand what can go wrong. What can go wrong is really more important than what can go right, because over time, even a marginally good business will profit, will do well. So you really need to understand. You don't know what anything is worth until you know what can go wrong, because we value things differently, because we weigh components differently. There's no such thing as valuation metrics based on some standardized formula unless you see it in connection with other issues.
Yeah.
So when you extract yourself from the financial world and you say, what is this salmon company worth? What if you were private? Well, you don't have metrics, or you can use listed company metrics. But what do I pay for this? And what do I pay in a genuine economy, not in a distorted economy that we have today, where the cost of money is zero? So today, valuations of businesses have been distorted on account, again, of these distortions in money. And so this is a very difficult time to have. This is why it's so important to have your own, your own subjective way of measuring and assessing value.
Yeah.
And part of this method includes the value that is imputed by elements of risk that are unique to a particular business, a particular geographic location, a comparative advantage, and all. So it's simple, but it isn't easy.
As Tony so beautifully put it, when you buy for the purpose of selling, you don't really need to understand what can go wrong. You see everything in terms of price. Having a clear understanding of the kind of business you want to have an ownership in is fast becoming a lost art. Today, the focus is almost exclusively on price and the ability to make a profit on a specific position, rather than finding an enterprise that offers a robust, sustainable revenue stream to an investor. Finding such businesses requires the diligence and discipline to look in places that most mainstream investors shy away from. But it's the very fact that the types of business which meet Tony's criteria are so rare that creates the value opportunity.
So let's talk about scarcity. Let's get back to that, the point of scarcity and why it's so important.
Well, I should tell you that in 2002, we formed an investment fund, which largely over the course of the next 4 or 5 years, I abandoned the private big investment counselor and just focused on this one fund. And in 2010, we changed the character of this to being more akin to a holding company. But the issue is that it became quite important when you are dealing with, you're no longer dealing with families where every decision you made had an impact of them directly because you knew who they were. But you were dealing with a pool of capital belonging to the very same people you had. Whether it was an error or not, I had made this sentiment, I've given the sentiment out that we will look after your savings, whatever you put into this investment company, as if it was the only money in the world you had. This brought about, this was a wonderful thing because it not only focused our views on doing the right thing for the whole, but it allowed a number of people to really keep into this investment company the vast bulk, in some cases all, of their financial savings or wealth. But this kind of policy does not lend itself to popularity because right. People want to put you in a box and they want to put a label on you. And investment practice does not, an honest investment practice does not lend itself to labels because, and they want to label you according to some predefined idea of what you are. You're a value investor or this or the other. And so it became really important in 2010, 11 or so, I don't remember the year, to create some, not a slogan, but a defining characteristic of the practice that would allow someone to focus on the essentials of it. And we used, we defined it by the word scarcity, and that scarcity is the most important law in economics, in that no one can have all that they want. The scarcity is a natural law, it's just part of life. There's scarcity in material goods, in resources, in everywhere you look at the scarcity in real savings in terms of money, other than perhaps credit that is being created. But there's not just scarcity only in visible, tangible resources. There's also scarcity in skill sets. There's also scarcity among the kind of characteristics in character in men that you and I would consider to be attractive. So scarcity in all of its permutations is an important ingredient in any action that deploys capital for the future. What makes a Van Gogh painting valuable is not the canvas or the paint, but the fact that there's only one. By the same token, there's a second component which we call permanence. I sometimes think we should have called it endurance, but nonetheless, it's the idea of creating a framework not only within your collection of investments, but by extension within each investment, the nature of the investment itself and the people, the participation that it represents in the kind of policies, the kind of practice, and the kind of purposeful behavior that is designed to endure, rather than merely grow. You can grow but become fragile and then die. That's not interesting to me. So if my mandate is to protect capital from both inflation, taxation, and bad decisions, then the idea of seeking to find endurance is very important. It's really important. And the third part was the idea of independence. And so there was scarcity, permanence. And independence is even of significant value as well, in the sense that much of what we see today in the world is, our world is interdependent today. We depend on so many external factors. We depend on suppliers, we depend on the light coming on when we turn on the switch. We take it for granted that the light will come on. We depend on the water company to, but more so in a business sense, we depend on perhaps key suppliers that often perhaps the situation is not as strong as we think it is. We depend on competitive, we have competitive pressures that have come as a result of competition that would not have been there had there not been credit. So credit creation, the debasement of money, has created an environment in which there is falsity within the competitive arena in which companies operate. And in order to survive, they have to more or less adapt to that conditions. And so there's depends on government for subsidies or for tax abatements or other such things. Sometimes there's dependence on one customer. So dependence makes the system fragile. So the more independent an organism is from external weaknesses, the more likely it is to add to its endurance or to its strength. So independence is very valuable and it's actually costly.
Yeah.
It is an element of freedom. Freedom doesn't come free. You have to work at it. The threats to your freedom and to your liberty, to your independence, are many, and they change from time to time and from epoch to epoch. But a successful practice in which seeks to protect, preserve, and enhance a patrimony over many years is one that must be concerned with these three components.
Yeah.
We think with words, the ancient Greeks said that the revisiting of definitions is the beginning of wisdom. So today we use words oftentimes without really thinking about their significance, and oftentimes words we use today have a different modern meaning than the word had been used in an earlier era. So we have to be careful about words. I actually don't use the word wealth much at all. I use the word savings, and by that I have a very precise meaning for savings, which is that which is left over from production after consumption, and the accumulated results of that savings over time. I think that people make the error of considering anything with a bid to have value, where frankly many of the things they have a bid on they may have financial value, but they have no economic value. So distinguishing that which has economic value from that which is just a claim or a loan or a promise is just merely a beginning, because even that which has real economic value, oftentimes its value is fleeting or is temporal. This is why I think that more than any other aspect of life, in investment practice, you and I have to be incredibly discriminating, to a point of absurdity, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are very few things that would fit in this very narrow and very constrained view of the sanctity of savings that I think is important.
You appear to be an outlier in the modern way that people think of managing money, but the truth is, you go back to an age before the noise, before this cacophonous din that surrounded money management. You're a throwback. You're a throwback to real money management as it used to be, when people didn't have 70,000 stocks to choose from. They had to invest their capital, they had to invest their savings in a way that was restricted by the universe they were presented with. All you've done is go back to those first principles you talked about earlier on. But to people watching this, you'll seem like some strange beast doing things in a strange way.
I think there are others, but there are very few.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think the reason we're few is because this kind of practice is not really what is wanted. There's no demand on the part of man with money in his pocket, for this sort of practice. Largely on account of the fact, but not only that man's time preference has changed over the years. It's hardly anyone who works to provide for another generation. People want to consume what they have. They see their investments as an extension of the current account. This isn't always true, but this debasement of money has changed. It has had a moral impact on man's view of his savings or his world. So there's really no demand for this at all. Very, very nominal and minimal. And I've said this from experience.
Sure. But what that does is it enables you to create a practice, create an investor base of, to your point, like-minded people, because they are so few, and guys like you nowadays are so few, that eventually you find each other, and that creates itself a very robust practice that gives you that time preference, that permanence of capital that enables you to do what you do.
Yeah, but the only way we would ever get permanence of capital, as other holding companies have, is by listing our shares on a stock exchange and making shareholder liquidity subject to exchange trading. That allows us to fix our capital base and not capital. Now, of course, shareholders can trade their shares with other shareholders, or a company buys back a few from time to time. But capital changes. I mean, they're insignificant. I mean, we have maybe 1% a year change in our capital.
Right.
It's just, by modern standards, it's tiny. I think you're looking at the wrong thing by saying I'm strange, but in that there have been many families and others in the past, particularly in Europe. Americans, if you ask them about investment, great investors, for example, they can name Warren Buffett, for example, which is here on this continent. There are many, and most of them are completely unknown, have no interest in promoting themselves, and they have extraordinary records over generations in creating wealth. In the form of a family or a listed holding company. When you start thinking about enriching yourself from the assets of those who are participants in your scheme, then you're no longer an owner, you become really, that becomes a business in itself. If, for example, our capital base is about 330 million. If it was double, I would not make any money. I would not see myself or any one of our team. This is completely different from the world in which funds and others operate, where the size of their capital pool is directly proportional to their income. And very little of it has to do with long-term results, because people do come and go. No one sees annualized rates of return over 20, 25 years, because no one hangs around for 25 years. But for each family alone, on a personal basis, the results over 20, 25 years matter a lot.
Yeah.
Finance gives you the tools with which to deceive oneself, to make it seemingly complicated, so you can razzle-dazzle people and make them think somehow you know more than they do, or on the average man who worked very hard for what he owns probably knows more than most investment advisors.
Yeah.
No, it's true.
Yeah. But there's this